KJ, you were on the ground. You had a chance to speak to some of the players after the game yesterday for Canada, losing to Morocco 2-1. The tournament now officially done. We knew they weren't moving on to the round of 16, but had one more game to go. Just take us on the ground. Be our eyes and ears and what you saw and what stood out to you in seeing the body language, demeanor, and just some of the things that the players were saying.
First thing that stands out to me is just what a great bunch of balanced individuals they are. I think that really needs to be spoken about. They have the ability to understand the accomplishment, act in a pretty classy way, and then understand the evaluation process where they were not good enough. And I think that you can do all of that if you're in individuals who are balanced. Ultimately, you're allowed to be mad about things and disappointed, and still show, I think, quite a lot of charisma and just general class. And that's what this team is. That's what we should be blessed in this country about. It's just what a great bunch of individuals they are. That said, I think, ultimately, they'll learn from this. And not every defeat leads to learnings unless you're open to it. But this team is. And so that was definitely something that I was really quite proud of, the way they handled it, speaking to, I think, 8 or 9 of the players. They were disappointed. And I think that most of them certainly weren't surprised. Most of them have played at a high enough level to understand what they were expecting. It wasn't like they came off the pitch and went, whoa, they're better than we thought. There was never that kind of intimidation or shock. At the end of the day, there was a realization that they weren't as good as the other teams, but they weren't shocked by it. And I think that, again, speaks to just the level of maturity and intelligence, the way that they've been going into these games.
First off, KJ, you're right. The way that they've handled themselves, it's been so impressive. We were remarking, we had a call earlier in the day, and they said, like, playing for the men's national team in this country, you sometimes ended up as the butt of the joke, right? You were the punchline for so long. Like, up until the last 2 or 3 years, it's been that way. And I know former players, it bothers them. They've had a lot of pride in their commitment to the team. I think these guys get that and understand the responsibility in taking it forward and doing it in the right way as well. And that's absolutely what they've done. And I'm glad that that's kind of the impression that you get on ground level as well. I just wonder, because there were some unanswered questions coming out of the game. I'm not sure if you heard any more about why Jonathan David didn't start that last game, like what prohibited Stefan Eustachio from playing, some of the decisions that were made, because, although that there is, a great deal of pride, there were still some questions about how that last game played out.
Yeah, so Eustachio couldn't play. He wasn't well enough. He wasn't fit enough. He's just feeling really, really tight, and it just wasn't getting any better. So there's just no way that he could play. We asked about in the press conference to John Herdman about Jonathan David, and he said it was a decision on fatigue, based on physical and mental fatigue. He felt that he wasn't quite, prepared to play him. He referred to the game against Mexico in Edmonton and said, I didn't start him in that game, and it went well for us in the system at that point. So we used that as a reference point. So that goes to that shows us what John was thinking heading into the game, where he was thinking a little bit along the similar lines. That being said, I've been pretty open with my discussion in this, where I thought it was the wrong thing from the start. And I did a radio hit today in Canada where they asked me about why it was such a disappointing World Cup for Jonathan David. And I had to put the brakes on it a little bit, because I think it's gone way over the top. Ultimately, in the first game against Belgium, he had 2 of the 3 best chances that they could play. He has to get in those positions in order to score them, first of all. When I don't want to ever play that card that you see things better live, because I know what a privilege I'm in. But the running off the ball that this guy does is something that doesn't always get picked up on broadcast television. And maybe it doesn't get seen by casual fans. But the pressing he did against Belgium, I thought was very underrated. The runs he makes are outstanding. I've never seen a Canadian striker make runs like him. Never. So, in the second game, it didn't go well for him. It wasn't necessarily the profile for him. And I was shocked he didn't start the third game, Wheels, to be honest. That was the impression I had. But, in the list of concerns you start to write down about Canada, you'll be writing a long time before you write the name Jonathan David.
Right.
Agreed.
Mm-hmm.
KJ, we talk about the blessing and the curse of being a striker. Like, you score one of those expected goals, which were all difficult, but he gets his head on one or maybe a tap in. He's a hero, right? But No one's taking in all the runs he does off the ball, the way he absorbs pressure, the movement he does to make other people free. The football nerds are the ones who are taking in the day-to-day or all the movements. We'll look at that. But people are like, oh, well, he went to a World Cup and he didn't score, but he plays for Lille. It's just like, the blessing and curse of being a striker. Personally, how I want to remember this team, or how I'm going to remember them, is they're representatives. Like, you have kids now that are living on the same street as Tajon Buchanan or Junior Hoylett in Brampton or in North Edmonton or in Montreal or all across this Canada, this beautiful nation, thinking and dribbling down their driveway or whatever it might be, shouting out names like Tajon Buchanan, Jonathan David, Kyle Larin. Like, this has never been the case. Me growing up as a Canadian boy wanting to play, when a World Cup was on, I was yelling out different names. But now in Canada, we have a group that we can call our own that are so accessible and tangible. We could grab them if we want to. We grew up in similar areas that they grew up in. So this is what it is. Now you have kids looking at soccer and saying, man, I could do this. And we could talk about it just being the World Cup, but it could permeate into other things. Like, if Alphonso Davies could be a talked about best top left back in the world, then there are Canadian kids feeling like, hey, the sky's the limit for me. I can make it in whatever I need to make it in.
Right. You're absolutely right about that. Like, we never kind of had that belief. We never had a pathway when we were kind of growing up, Jordan. I want to know, because the expectations basically set whether or not you thought that this World Cup was successful for Canada. I think that the expectations did get a little out of whack or overblown about the expectation for Canada. I agree with you, KJ. Like, this is kind of what I expect. I didn't expect them to go out and boss Belgium not the way they did, but it's kind of what I expect. Where do you think some of those misplaced expectations came from?
I think obviously casual fans. I don't think they probably knew the golfing quality. Maybe that certainly helped fuel it. Maybe casual members of the media. I don't know. But I do think it's okay for us to be wanting more and be disappointed in some regards the way that they played without expecting them still to win. There's a difference. I think that the way they played against Belgium exceeded most people's expectations, and they didn't get what they need. I think the way they played against Croatia, I think was lower than most people's expectations. And I think the first half against Morocco was the same. I was very disappointed the way that they set up. I was very disappointed in the way that they didn't necessarily play their best version of themselves against Morocco. And in the second half, they turned that around, and that was very important, as you guys covered on the show yesterday. So, look, I don't think many people expected us to see Canada get through the group here. I think they would have liked to have seen them get points, but ultimately they were the fourth seed in a very difficult group. But there's very fine lines in this World Cup, and it could have gone either way very quickly for them. Everyone's talking about Spain could still win this World Cup and what an absolute unmitigated disaster Germany were. Well, go look at the results. Both lost to Japan, both beat Costa Rica, and they drew with each other, right? So just look at the difference in contrast. There's so many. I just watched Switzerland, and we think they could go beat Portugal. They were one goal away from getting knocked out here. There's so many of those examples today. So the fine lines are there in sport, and it could have gone the right way for Canada in the end. They were very unlucky. And in the end, they go home with nothing. But, I do think that the expectations were a little bit too high, but we can also want them to play better than they did in those games.
Fine. I'll be the bad guy in this one. I'll be the Debbie Downer here a little bit, KJ, because, you just mentioned teams like Japan and who they were able to beat. Canada beat them. Costa Rica, that third game mattered to them. They were the fourth team in CONCACAF and had to go to a playoff. Like, when we do talk about expectations, the team itself gave us those expectations and what they did in CONCACAF. Did they punch above their weight? No. They played to their strengths. They finished first. They never lost to Mexico or USA, right? The giants of CONCACAF along the way. They actually had a pretty good showing at the Gold Cup. They took Mexico to extra time for Mexico to get that goal to move on. It was really a brain fart in the first minute of the game against the USA that they could never recover from 1-0. But they have always been, head to head with a lot of these teams in the last 2 years. And then because of the way they played against Belgium, I'm gonna say the expectations in many ways were dead on given the current circumstance, right? Like, not Croatia was in the final 4 years ago, that's fine. But currently, Canada has been playing really well. I mean, do you not get a sense, though, KJ, that, and I've heard some players say this, that they actually didn't play their best?
Oh, they definitely didn't play their best. No doubt about it. That's what I was hinting to before. I was disappointed the way that they played in half of the time here. The complete game against Croatia and the first half against Morocco, so 50%. But I'll just say this to your point that you just said. Sometimes, it's not just about outcomes. Do you want to be Costa Rica at this World Cup or do you want to be Canada? Costa Rica got absolutely annihilated by Spain. It could have been 11-12-0, okay? They couldn't get the ball. I watched them live against Japan. They were awful. Absolutely awful. They played 10 men behind the ball. Absolutely nothing to be inspirational about at all. They had one shot deflected that went over the goalie and they won 1-0. Okay, the Germany game, every credit, but that's why they got to the third game that mattered, playing a very negative style of football. And that's not where Canada needs to be as we get people to start to galvanize in this country. Ultimately, they need to be entertained and they need to have games like they played against Belgium. If they stuck 10 men behind the ball and they were negative, they may well have got to a third game, but that was never going to be the way this Canadian team played.
So is that the question then? What you do next? Sorry, Wheels, I know you want to jump in here. It's what you do next, because at the end of the day, other than getting the historic goal, they completely matched, as far as no points, right? No results, -5 when it comes to goal differential. Then the team, in 1986, they matched that. But is the difference, are they better equipped to move forward to be prepared for 2026?
I think they absolutely are. At tournaments like this, everything needs to go right for you to maximize on your potential. Like, it's such a quick tournament. Form of the players coming in. I'll say this again. I don't think we properly stated just how important and how crucial that loss to Stefan Eustáquio not being able to play in this team actually is. Like, central midfield, an area of weakness. There was no help across the back line. I mean, you're playing the same back three. There's no depth at that position. So when your margins are that thin, like over the course of World Cup qualifying, losing Davies, that seemed like it was going to be a death blow. It's incredible that it wasn't. Like, Canada were able to take advantage where other teams weren't, with the difficult travel, with some of the conditions that they played in. They're playing games in snow and ice, and like, Canada tilted qualification into their favor. Here on a level playing ground, MLS players not in season, no Eustáquio, Hutchinson not playing heading in. Like, it was just too much to overcome. I think it showed the limitations within this side more than anything else. And I don't think it does anything to kind of sway or take us away from recognizing what the potential actually is. Because you're right, it's there. And there is a better version of this team that we will probably see in the not so distant future.
Hey, good news is the World Cup goes until December 18th, which means we're still going to be talking Canada in all the days in between. So we'll, of course, look ahead and why we believe that they're better equipped to improve on, and maybe who's in the pipeline, who we could see playing on this team. Again, the biggest tournament that's coming up next for them will be Gold Cup. Like, who's going to be in net for them? Like, I'm really curious. Do you put Milan Borjan? Is it Max Crepeau if he comes back from injury, or is it someone else?